Hi everyone, this is Teacher Hannah, and in today's science video, we are going to be focusing on lab report writing. I know this isn't every science student's favorite topic, but it's a very important skill, and it's especially important for this year's 9th graders, as it will be a competency that you will be tested on when we return to school. For everyone else, it's a great skill to have in the upper sciences and even into college. So let's get started. One thing that scientists do all the time, even when they aren't working, is make observations about the world around them. I was walking around the other day and thought to myself, it's interesting how there are so many different colored flowers growing naturally in Somaliland. Look and see for yourself. Then I wondered, could I make flowers change their color? So I decided to conduct an experiment to test this scientific question. Using this experiment, we are going to practice writing the first two sections of a lab report, the introduction and materials and methods. In order to write a lab report, you need to do the experiment first. Grab a pen and a piece of paper because you might want some notes on this next part so that you can use them to write your own introduction and materials and methods sections. Okay, so we want to test if flowers can change color. In order to do this, we're going to try putting some flowers into different colored water and see what happens. So our question is, will a flower change color if it is put in different colored water? In order to do this, these are the supplies we are going to need. We're going to need 3 beakers or cups, 3 white flowers, and 3 different colors of water. So we can use food coloring to dye the water. I want to use white flowers because that'll make the colors show up the easiest. Okay, here's what the experiment looks like when it's all set up. There's a couple of extra flowers in each of the cups. That way we just have some extra trials so we can compare results at the end. But wait, remember in most experiments we have both an experimental and a control group. The control group is there to kind of give us something to compare results to and see if the experimental group actually had a change. So in this experiment, we were only looking at the experimental group because all of the different cups that we had all had food coloring in them. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to set up a 4th cup, and this one is the control group. This is a white flower that's in plain water, which is the normal or natural way that flowers would be growing. They wouldn't normally be growing in colored water. This way we can see if there's a change comparing the clear water and the colored water. All right, so once we add together all of our supplies, including the supplies for the control group, here's what we need. We need 4 beakers or cups, 4 white flowers, and then still only 3 different colors of water and 1 beaker of clear water. So that's our complete list of supplies, including everything we need. Before we go on, I want you to take a minute and think about this question. What are the variables in this experiment? Remember, in every experiment, we're talking about an independent variable, which is the thing that we're changing, and the dependent variable, which is the thing that changes in response. If you need a review on this, you can go back to my first video, which was about variables in science. But I want you to think about what are the independent, dependent, and a few control variables in this experiment. So pause the video now and take a minute to figure this out. All right, have you finished that question about variables? Great. If you have written them down, you can also enter them into the Google form on your Google Classroom. And that way I can give you feedback on if they're correct or incorrect. So the next thing I would like you to think about is what are the major components that should be included in every introduction. So if you remember back to when I gave you the lab report rubric, in the introduction, there's a few specific things that you need to include every time you're writing a lab, regardless of what the lab is. So I'd like you to pause the video again and think about what are the major components that should be included in every introduction. There should be about 4 to 5 things that you come up with. So take a minute, pause the video, and write those down now. All right, I hope you got those things. I'm going to review them with you now so that we can see if you got them correct. So in the introduction, you need to make sure that you have included the purpose of the experiment. So this is why are we doing the experiment? Why does the experiment matter? This is the first thing that the reader should see in your introduction so that they know what the experiment is for. Why are we doing it? You need to include background information. So what this really means is kind of what is happening in the experiment. If someone's reading your introduction and they read your purpose, and then they read your variables, and then they read your hypothesis, but they don't know what you did in the experiment, they're not going to understand any of the other things. So make sure that you give them some background information. It doesn't have to be every step that you took, that's going to be covered later, but just give them a good idea of what happened. You want to include your hypothesis. So this is your best guess as to kind of what's going to happen as a result of this experiment. So you can write this in the if-then format, or you can just write it as a statement, whatever you prefer. Okay, and lastly, important scientific concepts. So think about, what do you need to know in order to do this experiment? So think about someone who isn't in your class who wants to do this experiment. What about science would they need to know in order to do this? So for this experiment, maybe they need to know how nutrients and water move throughout a plant. So you might need to do a quick Google search to figure that information out. And of course, don't forget your variables. So include your independent, dependent, and control variables in your introduction. The last thing I want to say about this is make sure that your thoughts flow together logically. So you want to kind of add an introductory sentence at the beginning of your introduction and a conclusion sentence at the end, just to make sure that everything flows together very nicely. And of course, one more time, do not forget your variables. They're not on the rubric, but they are part of the background information, so make sure they're included. All right, so now I would like you to try to write an introduction for this flower experiment on your own. So remember to include these 5 things that I just talked about. So you can take a moment, pause the video, and write down what you think would be a good introduction based on the information I've provided you. All right, have you finished? Great work. We're going to move on to the materials and methods section next. To get feedback on your introduction, you can upload that to the Google form on your Google Classroom page, and I'll give you feedback within the next couple of days. So, in your materials and methods section, if you recall, formatting matters in materials and methods. So this is one section. They go together, the materials and methods, although they seem like slightly separate things. So you want to make sure that you're formatting the headings for this section properly. In your materials, you want to have a bulleted list of all the materials that you used in the lab. So make sure that this is comprehensive, and anyone that wanted to repeat your experiment could use this list in order to do it. So make sure that you include everything and you're not leaving out simple things such as what containers you used, what glassware you used, water, etc. So now I'd like you to pause the video again. Based on the flower experiment, write a bulleted list of the materials that you would need to use, and then upload that to the Google Classroom, and I'll take a look at it and let you know what I think. All right, did you finish your list? Let's move on to the methods. So in the methods section, you want to include all of the steps that you took to complete the experiment. So make sure that you're including everything that was important so that someone could replicate the experiment. Don't leave anything out. And you want to make sure that this is written in the past tense passive voice. So this is something that's happened in the past. You're just saying what you personally did. So for example, I would say, the water was poured into the beaker. I wouldn't say I, because I don't want to put it in the active voice. And I also wouldn't say, I pour the water, or the water is poured, because I want it in the past tense. So make sure you check your voice and your tense every time you're writing your methods. All right, again, I'd like you to pause the video and try writing a list of methods for this experiment. So you can submit these to the Google Classroom, and I'll let you know what I think about it. All right, nice job, everyone. We've made it through the first 2 sections of the lab report. So from today, we worked on the introduction and the materials and methods. Next time, we're going to work on the results and the discussion. Those are really the hardest parts of the lab report. So I hope you had a good experience practicing these first 2 sections today. And thank you so much for listening. Don't forget that this is a 9th grade competency. So 9th graders, you're going to need to know how to write a lab report when you get back to school. So keep practicing. If you have extra questions, always feel free to reach out to me in the Google Classroom. I'm happy to help you. Bye, everyone.